Hi, everyone. So in the past class, we were talking about the Dome of the Rock and the Mosque of Damascus. Uh, and I want to look at a broader spectrum of art that was being made in the medieval Middle East in the 700s. Why? Because I think this gives us a better glimpse, a fuller understanding of the type of artwork that was being produced, and therefore also the imperial identity of the Umayyads, not just as leaders of a Muslim empire, but as rulers in general of a multi-ethnic uh, kingdom or empire that stretched across much of the known world. So we don't have much to look at least we don't have much art. We don't have many bowls. We don't have really much except for a few buildings. One of them is what we talked about before, right? It's the Dome of the Rock, the Qubbat al-Sahra, which is the first monumental Islamic building, uh, at least the only one that survives today. And it was a major piece of work. As you can see here, it is again an octagonal piece with a gold dome on the top. If you look inside, you'd have very nice mosaics, and it is built over a rock, which has a special significance. Now we talked about why it is that this was taking place in Jerusalem and um, how it was seen as a staging ground for the end of times, and also that it had a very particular type of decorative regime. So rather than using figurative images, instead focus mainly on the vegetable. So there's no animals, there's no humans, there are sort of scrolls of plants, and there's inscription. And here again, this is the first time we see inscriptions, the Arabic script used as a form of decoration. And this would actually come to represent much of the so-called, let's say, Islamic aesthetic of public buildings, right? So you would not have figurative images, but you would have instead vegetal scrolling, abstract designs, and calligraphy as decoration, as ornament, right? And this is another building. This is the Great Mosque, Umayyad Mosque of Damascus, built by Abdul Malik's son Walid, where you have similar things. You have masterful mosaics done by Byzantine craftsmen, but not with any figurative images. You do have buildings, etc. But I want to look at something else now, which is the desert palaces, or basically retreats, hunting palaces that the Umayyads built throughout the Syrian desert, essentially what is in today Jordan. There's quite a few of them. And if you look at this map, you can see there's at least 9. So this was actually a major undertaking by the Umayyads to provide, or essentially palaces built for short-term usage, often when hunting or on retreats. Pieces of these are still extant today. In fact, some of the most famous ones, Mushatta, which is a gigantic one, was carted over and is displayed in Berlin at the Pergamon Museum, the Museum of Islamic Art. And you can actually see just how intricate and massive this craftsmanship was. Others are still standing in situ, like this is Qasr al-Hayr al-Sharqi, which you can see, I mean, a relatively massive castle piece. And the more interesting thing, though, is that these aren't just palaces that remain today, but instead, inside, they actually have mosaics, they have decoration, and a different regime of decoration of ornament than you would find in these public Islamic buildings like the Dome of the Rock or the Mosque of Damascus. Instead, for example, at here in Kharbat Mafjar, it just means ruins, but this was another palace. And you would have actually a relatively developed ornamental program that does have figurative images, right? It has the very same images of animals, plants, etc., that you would find in Byzantine work at that time. And more interestingly, you would have also statues and other images of humans. This one in Khilbat Mafta is actually, I mean, we don't know exactly what it's supposed to be, but it bears a very strong resemblance to the standing caliph figure that Abdul Malik put on his coin in the moment of experimentation during his raid. So if you remember, during his raid, he was visually experimenting with the images that should define his raid and for him, the Islamic community. And he wanted to break out of the traditional Byzantine or Sasanian coinage. And one of the things he did is he put this figure on it. It's unclear what exactly it is. It could be him himself. It could be a figure of a caliph. Caliph, again, is the term that he started introducing to describe the leader of the Islamic community or the Islamic empire. And what we see here is that he actually made, or statues of it were made and posted inside these palaces. So to a royal audience, to an audience, a small audience, not in public, who'd be invited to spaces of royal prestige and of display, this was obviously an important part of their artistic program. And you can see that, again, this is the Byzantine mosaics, which existed at the time. Some of these from the Byzantine palace, some of these are from other sites. But they're essentially recreating aspects of many of these palaces, but for their own use. This is another one. This is Casa Garbi. And if there you would actually find even frescoes, so not just mosaics or even statues, which are impressive, but frescoes painted onto the ceilings, depicting classical themes, things like the earth, the seasons, etc. We have traditional themes that would be placed in hunting lodges or palaces. Here you have two musicians playing, one a sort of lute, the other flute, because this would probably reflect the type of practices that would be done in these hunting lodges and palaces, right? You would have courtiers or musicians playing music while people would eat and feast and enjoy themselves. So this is a very different vision of public art. What's interesting also is that there's hunting scenes, and these are, of course, the whole half of these places were hunting palaces, right? Places where the caliph and his entourage would go to relax while they were hunting in the desert. But what's interesting about this image is that it actually borrows directly from the image of the Sasanian king or Shah hunting himself, right? So this is actually almost very close version of it. Here, this king is on a camel with a camel rider behind him while he focuses on hunting. But we have essentially the same types of images borrowed. And we can see, in fact, that even as Abdul Malik and the Umayyads were transitioning away from Sasanian images on the coins, they continued to use them in their private residences and for their own private legitimization, that is, to a smaller audience of royal courtiers. There's other interesting pieces, sculptures built within this, often dealing with kind of classical antiquity. So we have, for example, this bathing woman statue, and the most interesting palace, the one of Qusayr Amra, the little palace of Amra. We have similar bathing women frescoes. This time, you can see much more clearly what is the purpose, or at least the context of this bathing woman. Let's go back to the statue real quick. So again, we have a woman bare-breasted carrying a sort of jug. Similar situation here. And we can see this is supposed to be a bathing woman or a bathroom attendant. The jug is used to pour water on herself. This is because there was often a bathhouse within these palaces, right? So as the palaces would be decorated for each room would be used for a different use, and the decoration of each room basically told you what was supposed to be done here. What's interesting about these frescoes is just how intricate they were, and how much color survives to this day, right? Remember, these are almost 1,500 years old. That was brought in to develop it here. And again, we see very similar aspects across these palaces, building off of classical imagery. In this case, for example, in a different palace, there's even a mosaic of Aphrodite, or a different church, sorry. Other places you have continuations of the very same themes and imagery, partially just because probably all the craftsmen were, again, Christians. This is what they were used to making. When asked to decorate a palace, they're like, well, we'll make a palace or an image just like we do for any fancy person. And so this is what they came up with. In the interior decorations, we have, again, similar types of versions. Even in the Qasr al Garbi, we have pieces of basically stucco decoration of nude women, bathhouse attendants. Here again, we can see where people bathing depicted. And we have other, like, braziers, pieces of the furniture, essentially, that was being used. And again, we can see just how much it pulls off of classical imagery of the Byzantines from the period. One of the most interesting things, though, is a set of frescoes, which are not the most well preserved, in Qusayr Amra, which are supposed to have basically, in Greek, it specifically says, philosophy, history, and poetry, the muses of philosophy, history, and poetry, discussing things. Today, it's hard to see them, but if you look to all these frescoes, you would find all sorts of figurative images, visions of different daily events in life, and in this one specifically, a zodiac fresco. What you see here again and again is a continuation of Byzantine fresco techniques of figurative imagery developed for this. Probably one of the more interesting things, again, is this enthroned prince fresco. So not only are they kind of copying or continuing the decoration that would be in a palace, but they're also integrating aspects of their own decorative principles here, but this time not to depict an actual Umayyad prince being tutored. I'm presuming it's this guy. I'm not actually, I think this is the prince. This is the person in authority. And so under the, no, sorry. The Umayyad prince would be on the throne here, and then depicted on the other side. These would be just additions to what they would imagine people sitting down and speaking on cushions while these were going on. It's hard to see this, but you can actually see the most interestingly what's known as the Five Kings fresco. And if you were to look, let me see if I have another image of this. Got six kings. So here you have six kings. One is the Byzantine emperor. The other is the Visigothic king Roderick. You have the Sasanian king, the Ethiopian king, possibly the Turkish and Chinese kings. That's unclear. But what you do have here in this space is essentially an interesting mix of different kingly images, which would have been contrasted with the presence of the actual Umayyad caliph, right? So he sees himself as a king or as an emperor, and he wants to be put alongside other emperors. And so he's using visual depictions in a very different sense from what he does publicly to push this through. Now, it turns out that the art of these desert palaces did not become the standard model. So even other palaces that would be built later did not continue to use frescoes to depict emperors and kings and so forth. But what I want to point out is just how much experimentation and how much difference there existed at that time. Ultimately, these palaces were abandoned after 750. 750 marks the end of the Umayyad dynasty. And this model didn't keep going. But it just shows that in a private setting, figurative images were perfectly fine. And this we can actually see again in illustrations in books. Now, these illustrations, which are often called miniatures, don't exist from earlier than about 1100. And some of the most famous and most important ones, the ones that you would see in museums, are usually from Timurid Iran, Afghanistan and Iran. So from the 1400s and from the Safavid period, from kind of 1500, 1700 in Iran. They just have the highest quality painting, etc. So I'm going to show you some of the imagery that was associated with these. Basically, how did people depict religious imagery with figurative power in both private and public settings? So if you're offended by images of Prophet Muhammad, just a warning, it's going to come. I'm going to show you some now. So this is a very famous piece showing the ascension of the Prophet Muhammad on the horse Buraq during the Miraj. It's part of, I think, of the what's called the Mongol. No, this is Timurid piece, but you can see actually here in the script itself, it's not actually Arabic. It's actually a type of Mongol or Uyghur script. And here we have, so in these images, what you see essentially is this Baraj-name, a depiction of the heavenly ascent of the Prophet Muhammad, where he meets angels. Also, in this case, the Prophet Muhammad himself is fully depicted. He's not veiled or anything but he does have a holy aura. And you can see just by the quality of this painting, the detail, etc., that this was meant for a royal audience. It was an incredibly expensive image. It was not easily available or probably visible to the public. This is a closer look at the Uyghur script here. But there's many other images like this. I just picked one to show you. But for the most part, though, these images in book illustrations were not public, right? They were so expensive that the only people who could afford them were kings. They were never bought and sold. They were gifted. And they were never really seen by an everyday person. In fact, most people would not encounter images in general just because they were difficult to make and paint. And then on top of this, there developed over time a general aversion to figurative imagery in Islamic culture. That doesn't mean it didn't exist. It, as I pointed out, exists all over the book arts and so forth. But in public buildings, and especially in religious occasions, there tended not to be figurative images. What's interesting, though, is that there's other ways of coming across or dealing with this problem. And one of the interesting things that occurs is in the 1500s to 1800s, development of something called the Hilya, which is actually supposed to be a portrait of the Prophet Muhammad. Here are two examples, both from, I think, the 19th century. What we have here is essentially a circle-like space of calligraphy, and then sometimes usually you have a square here. On the top here, it says Bismillah, in the name of God. And what you have is essentially a description of the Prophet Muhammad based on from hadiths, but it's all contained in very nice calligraphy and through words. So in a sense, the calligraphy itself, the words itself stand for the Prophet Muhammad or the image of the Prophet Muhammad. Now, if you were to look at what this actually says, it's almost always the same. It says, Ali, the son-in-law of the Prophet, may God be pleased with him, when he would describe the Prophet, would say, he's not too tall and attenuated, nor was he excessively short. He was medium-sized. His hair was not short and curly, nor was it lank. but it was smooth and wavy. His face was not narrow, nor was it fully round, but there was a roundness to it. His skin was ruddy white, his eyes were black, he had long eyelashes, he was big boned and had wide shoulders. He had no body hair except in the middle of his chest. He had thick hands and feet. When he walked inclined as if descending a slope. When he looked at someone, he looked at them full in the face. So what you have here is a description of the Prophet Muhammad, but one in which he's basically supposed to embody this golden mean, right? He's perfectly in the middle of everything. He's not too hairy, he's not unhairy. His hair is wavy, it's not curly, it's not smooth. He's medium sized, he's medium height, he's kind of perfectly at the divine medium. But it also talks about kind of how his gestures were, how he moved, how he'd look in people. And this continues at the bottom, right? He says, between his shoulders was the seal of prophecy, the sign of the last prophets. He was the most generous of men, the most open-hearted of them, truthful of them. Whoever saw him unexpectedly was in awe of him. Anyone who saw him would say, I never saw before him or after him the like of him. So in this bottom section, it's more about his kind of superlative characteristics, how he's kind of the most perfect man. And here you have just a different, it's not so much his direct description, but his general characteristics. So I just wanted to show this to you to show just how differently there have been approaches to portraiture, to the role of images, to figurative description, etc., in Islamic art, and especially for public religious art, and how much it's changed over time. Until next time, I'll talk to you soon.